for now. I'm gonna link you this video once I put it up, so you can review it for me and argue against my takes.
Okay. Cool. Send
You
it to
can
me.
critique my arguments. Yeah, I sent you it on DMs.
Okay. Let me pull it up.
You could probably put it at 2 times speed too, or like 1 point something, 1.5 or 1.7, because I'm talking pretty slow during this.
Okay.
I'm gonna hop out the channel real quick.
Okay, so my overall take was your label that you use should be a combination of what your core beliefs are, what the political utility is of that label, how are other people going to interpret that label. That really matters when we're choosing how to identify ourselves. That's why we choose different labels, is because other people are going to be hearing that. It's not just for self-identification. And also, it should be like your grouping. So if you're going to be in politics as this label, you're probably going to work with people who are a part of this label. Maybe if you're a socialist or a Democrat or a democratic socialist, of course you're going to be working with people on the left or whatever, but you have like a particular camp, and that camp should have unique ideas to make that label's utility make sense. And I just don't think the label socialist today makes any sense, especially when your standard for being a socialist and qualifying for, you know, those values or whatever just basically means you are a little bit more edgy about social democratic positions. So like higher taxes on.
So, okay. So I will reiterate my disagreements with this. I think that political labels should be about your values. That normally, like, we have different political labels for different things. So if I'm talking about, like, what my prescriptions are, I'm going to call myself a Republican or a Libertarian or a Democrat or like a Green Partier or something like that. But if I want to tell you what my values are, I'll call myself a conservative. I'll call myself a liberal. I'll call myself a progressive. I'll call myself a socialist. I'll call myself an alt-righter. Like, these do not necessarily tell you what my prescriptions are, but they do tell you kind of what my values are, where I'm coming from. And when it comes to socialism, after the Vaush irrelevant debate, it seemed as though most socialists said that Vaush was wrong. At least all of the ones that I saw on Twitter, the people that follow me or the people that I follow, Rose Wrist, Dario, Chud Logic, Mouthy Infidel, Hans of Harkir, like all of these people disagreed with Vaush and what it was that he was saying in this debate. They all pretty much said, like, no, I think hypocrisy is bad. I think we should live up to our values. I think that we should have standards for ourselves, especially higher standards, because we consider these things to be more good. And so if we're going to preach them, we have to practice them. That seemed to be the stance from all of the socialists that I follow. And so I don't think that, like, what Vaush said in that debate should be like a general representation of socialists, because for the most part socialists don't seem to hold the same way of thinking as Vaush. And like Vaush made most of his claims based on pure utilitarianism, which is obviously a bullcrap system and is a pretty gross system when you really think about it. But if you want to be some type of utilitarian, like, yeah, be a rule utilitarian or an act utilitarian, but not like a freaking pure utilitarian. That's like a really gross system where, like, killing one person is justified if it means you get to save 5. Like, that's a gross thing to do, to be able to, like, override someone's individual liberties because it's for the good of more people, or you get the most good out of that. It's a pretty gross thing to do. So yeah.
On the rich, worker representation on boards. Maybe you like worker co-ops, you want to push for those a little bit. Like, that isn't really a socialist thing. That's like a little bit of a socialisty idea, in my opinion. in this current landscape, you can't really advocate for socialism. And in the conversation of Vaush, he doesn't believe socialism is even possible in his lifetime. So in my opinion, it would be more honest and more correct and more useful to call yourself a like progressive or something that does.
So again, when we're talking about values, when it comes to socialism, this is a value that people hold. If they want to push for socialism because they want that to be the end goal for the future, then that makes perfect sense. If I'm a Christian and you say, dude, don't call yourself a Christian if you don't think that you can actually move enough people over to Christianity, then like I'd be like, well, that's weird. I don't call myself a Christian because of what I think I can do with those values. I call myself a Christian because I hold those values. Like one has absolutely nothing to do with the other.
Doesn't already have generations of baggage, especially when you don't even yourself believe socialism is possible. If I wanted to, I could, and people told me, like, oh, Vaush doesn't think social democracy is good enough. He isn't going to settle with that. Well, I don't want to settle with anything. If I wanted to choose my most idealistic label, I could call myself, and people in chat gave me this idea to call myself a utopian. Like, I want a utopia. It's gonna all be perfect. Food's gonna fall from the sky like Cloudy with a chance of meatballs, and I have an actual like economic plan to get us there. Eventually, you know, I'm not happy with socialism or communism or anything. I'm actually gonna push past that because all of these systems just aren't good enough for me. So I can choose my most idealistic position, but in my opinion, that's not what your label should be. Do you think explicitly socialist organizations like the DSA aren't worthwhile? Feels like the only type of organization that has broader organizing outside of elections. No, I think democratic socialism can make sense if you're going to organize as a third party within the Democratic Party. But no matter what, I don't like anybody who wants to make real political change. I don't like them having the label socialist. You carry so much baggage with that label. There is no reason you need to be a socialist, and there is no reason, instead of being a socialist, that you can't be a working class Democrat.
So that's kind of the point though, right? Is because that label carries so much baggage, it's necessary for people now to call themselves socialists who are leaders in politics. So like, is it necessary for Bernie Sanders to call himself a socialist? No, definitely not. That actually hurts him. It harms him. It makes it to where it's harder for him to get votes because that label has so much baggage. So he himself probably shouldn't call himself a socialist, but should like Vaush or Hassan call themselves socialists? Yeah, of course. Like it's helpful to the movement if popular people call themselves socialists because it takes away a lot of the negative connotations that come with it. And like really, all you need to call yourself a socialist is to believe that the workers should own the means of production. There's not like a whole lot else outside of that you need to call yourself a socialist. Now, are there more things on top of that, like decommodification and, more democratic processes? Like, yeah, of course. But really all that matters is that the workers own the means of production. Like that's the core tenet of socialism, and as long as you believe that thing, you are a socialist. If I believe that Jesus Christ is the Lord and Savior, that's really all I need to call myself a Christian. That's all I need for that label. Now, is it also true that like I could probably add on like a whole bunch of other things that aren't like that normally come with the label? Yeah, of course. Like I could add on like, well, you shouldn't cuss, you shouldn't drink, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But are those necessary to be a Christian? No. Like, and does it hurt you to call yourself a Christian? Yeah. But if you're being honest, like you should own your positions. You shouldn't like cower from your own positions just because like other people might not like your positions, right?
That you can't be a pro-union Democrat, that you can't be a Democrat who advocates for higher taxes, that you can't be a Democrat who advocates for worker ownership or like worker representation on boards. Right now in this current system, and this was my big issue with the entire Vaush thing, Vaush acts identically to anybody who is a social democrat that you could find in this current system. Him being a socialist literally doesn't matter. The label socialist is great for the online stuff, but it literally doesn't matter. Especially when you have no standards and I understand his argument. He wants everybody to be a socialist, so he wants the barrier to entry to be very low. That's why he has his take on Hassan. He wants it to be very chill to be a socialist. For example, many Democrats and Republicans, most voters vote in a partisan manner. People don't have really complex thinking patterns when they go to the ballot office. So Vaush wants electoral power for socialists. So the reason he doesn't want to say, like, hey, Hassan should be held to a higher standard because he's a socialist is because Vaush wants a wine mom, eventually, to say, yeah, I'm not that into politics, but I'd probably be a socialist. He wants Democrat right now, or he wants what is considered to be like a progressive right now, to eventually be a socialist, which doesn't make much sense to me. Because if you dissolve the word socialism to mean, oh, I'm for higher taxes, I'm for more worker representation, I'm for unions, if that's what socialist means anyway, what is the difference between a social democrat and a socialist? What?
I mean, I would consider myself a conservative because those are what my values are, but I vote as a soc dem because I think that like Republicans actually harm the country, so I wouldn't vote as a Republican. But me being a soc dem and me voting as a social democrat doesn't mean that all of a sudden my values are no longer conservative. It just means that these are the prescriptions that I find best for the country. And I think that those can play into all sorts of different types of groups. Like, there's only two parties that can actually win realistically in an election. So you only have two options, but at the same time, there are tons of political labels. Like, we don't have one group for, like, we don't have a new political party for every type of value label. Like, that's just not a thing that exists. I hate this game.
You tweet different, you make different YouTube videos. Like, honestly, what is the difference between those? I know why the DSA does what they do. They want to say we are the third party within the Democratic Party. They're going to get political power through those means. I still don't like the label socialist, but in general, why call yourself a socialist and not just a working class Democrat? Why not be the working class coalition within the Democratic Party? Why do people need to hold on to the socialist label? Why do they need to hold on to a label that holds so much baggage? There is literally no necessity to this. I don't understand, unless if somebody in chat disagrees with me. Is there a necessity? Like, do we need to have the label socialist attached to everything we freaking do?
Like, we don't need any labels. No, there isn't any label that is, like, needed or necessary. But, like, even conservatives have so many different types of conservatism, right? Like, we're all conservatives, but we also have paleocons, we have neocons, we've got the alt-righters, we've got the America Firsters, like, or groypers. Like, there's all sorts of people who fall into the right wing, and the right wing is like the broad label, and then you have Democrats and Republicans, and then you know, all of the other political labels that normally fall under those groups. But they describe completely different things. And again, if you want to make like you say, like the label socialist comes with so much baggage to where the values that you hold as a soc dem will not lead to workers owning the means of production. I don't want the workers to own the means of production, but I am a soc dem, and I think most soc dems aren't pushing for the workers to own the means of production or seize the means of production. They don't want any of these things. They think that the country can do just fine under capitalism, and as long as like we just add in some social programs here and there, then we'll be fine. But socialists don't believe that. They believe that it is truly evil for the one who has the capital to own the means of production, and they have to that the workers have to own the means of production in order for the economic system to be moral. Play my clip? Well, we're talking about something completely different right now, B. Heller. We'll get to that.
Or whenever I have to talk about Bernie Sanders, do I need to go through why the USSR wasn't actual socialism, although it was left-wing principles gone authoritarian? It's a, you know, it 100% was. You can't just say it was right-wing. Every time I have to sell a policy to somebody, I have to I have to do the heavy lifting of saying why socialism isn't bad. Are you kidding me? Do you know how dumb and like, oh my God, it's so directionless. It's so pointless. Like, it makes me so upset because we can be advocating for these popular policies, but we're being held down by this reluctance to modernize this approach.
But you specifically don't have to hold that label. Like, your goals are not the same as somebody like Vaush's. The long-term goals, like, you have more short-term goals. You have things that you want to get done right away. But obviously they don't. I mean, when we talk about whether or not you should donate to charity or whether or not you should pay your mods, like, these things seem pretty simple. Like, yeah, obviously if you call yourself a socialist, you should do that. But if they're willing to bypass that and say, well, actually, I don't care if the workers for Hassan own the means of production, I care that he's able to make the label of socialism more palatable for people, so that in the future we can actually get like major socialist policies passed, then like that's their goal. You have different goals from them.
Like, what does socialism even mean? Like, nobody in America, no politician in America, even Bernie Sanders, who calls himself a democratic socialist, nobody is advocating for full worker ownership of anything. They aren't able to. We aren't at that place since this, like, there just is no pragmatic utility to it. What's the most socialist thing Bernie Sanders ever said? He wants to or he wants to have more nationalized, like, energy grids. He said that once in his Green New Deal plan. That's probably the most, like, socialist-y thing. Should we also get rid of the term feminism because it also has a lot of baggage? No. We should get rid of the term toxic masculinity and the term white privilege. We should stop using those terms and relying on those terms.
Yeah, I definitely think of a hot mom when I hear wine moms. Like, I think of some hot rich moms all sitting around kissing each other and taking bubble baths together. I'm just kidding.
Because those have an automatic negative connotation to them. Feminism doesn't have a negative connotation to most people.
Not
There
anymore.
is no history of
Not anymore, but it did for a long time. It had a negative connotation to most people for a long time. The more people that took on that label, the more popular people that started calling themselves feminists, the more palatable it became. It's important for more and more people to take on labels that are that like have a lot of baggage with them, if they're not inherently bad. If they are things that could actually work, then it's important for people to take on those labels. Now, I'm not a socialist. I don't like socialism. I don't care about socialism. But I can completely understand why people would want to take on that label and rebrand it into a thing that is more palatable, because historically it's been implemented by some pretty horrible people, and the label has been tarnished. But that doesn't mean that the label itself is actually bad. The meaning behind it isn't actually bad, and so they can advocate for things and rebrand that label and give it more specificity so that people can actually get behind. So that people can actually get behind the movement and and make this something that works in the future.
That doesn't hold the same weight. If you think that's comparable, I would strongly disagree. Yes, the polls on socialism are becoming more popular in the U.S. over time, but I really don't care about those polls. Those polls are weak. Those polls are very weak. Vaush basically only cares about optics, and all his arguments are filtered
That one shot just killed 3 dudes. That was pretty sick.
through that lens. He doesn't care about optics because his arguments suck. The way he was talking yesterday, it really was so wordy. Do you know those rappers who are made fun of for being like overly complex with their rhyme schemes? Does anybody know, like, I guess Eminem is the one that's actually decent at it, but there's a lot of YouTube rappers that do this, where they make everything sound really complex for literally no reason. It's the whole meme with I'm a lyrical, spiritual miracle through my stereo, so venereal. It's hysterical. It's a miracle. The way I get tranquility and ability and the skill I see. Like, they have these words rhyming. It's like, or when Eminem did, that's an awfully hot coffee pot. Like, there's no reason for what Vaush was saying. Using this condescending language, using this verbiage that it sounds condescending by nature because he's using a bunch of big words for no reason, just to like, it sounds like he's trying to just sound smart. And I know this is a meme from Destiny's Twitter, but this meme holds true. I watched around half of that debate from last night. Yeah, like logic. I watched around half of that debate last night. And this is how he sounded. This is how Vaush sounded. Your entire point is spite driven. What? Your inability to understand utility. And oh, I can't say that word. I know it's arbitrary. See, I'm too dumb. I'm too dumb. Oh, I'm not. God, I'm too dumb. How do you say that word? Somebody put the phonetic spelling in chat for me. Your inability to understand utility. He's like trying to sound deep and trying to sound a lot more complex than he actually is, making these points. And if you call yourself a socialist, like, I need everybody to ask themselves, what does it mean to be a socialist in America today? If you call yourself a socialist, what pragmatic utility does that have? What does it really mean? And why is that better than calling yourself a social democrat? Because I think you should call yourself what you actually are, participating in the current political system. I think everybody has an ideal future post-scarcity where everybody is living in harmony and everybody owns a piece of society.
So what about the Bernier Busters? What about those guys? Are those the only ones who can call themselves socialists because they don't actually engage in any sort of politics? In they like, because the only way that somebody like a socialist can engage in politics is by being a soc dem or you know, a Republican or something like that. Like, these people aren't able to just go off and vote for the socialist unless they're voting for like the Green Party or some crap like that. I don't know, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of options for them. If they want to be pragmatic, they have to vote for Democrats. That's their only option. That's as close as it gets to their values. So when they go to vote, like, they're like making their own beliefs null and void because that's as good as it gets for them. That doesn't make sense to me. Like, one of the problems with socialists for a long time was that they weren't being pragmatic with their beliefs and kept doing the Bernie or bust memes, and it was pretty stupid. Everybody made fun of them for it. But now you're saying, hey, no, go back to Bernie or bust. What are you doing? Why are you being pragmatic with the way that you interact within our democratic system? Like, you need to stop doing that. Like,
And everybody has some type of, like, you know, vision of the future. Why label yourself as the most idealistic version of your thought, especially when you're very pessimistic about the prospect of socialism ever working? As Vaush said many times, he doesn't even believe socialism's ever going to work in America in his lifetime. So why, if you don't think this is something that's possible within the next 100 years, why call yourself that?
whoa.
We don't need that magical word. It's not a religion. I don't take political labels typically because I really don't care. I really do not care about capitalism or socialism or social democracy or whatever. I care about general progressivism when it comes to civil liberties and when it comes to fighting for people power. And by people power, I don't mean
Yeah, but like what civil liberties are those? If the civil liberty is for the workers to own the means of production, then yeah, you're a socialist. If the like if the things that you're fighting for are socialist things, then why not call yourself a socialist? Like I would actually say it hurts the socialist movement more for a bunch of people who are socialists to not call themselves that. Like if they're not actually going to hold on to their own values and act as though they're like a real thing, then I would definitely say that's a bad thing.
I mean policies that benefit people and not corporations, and representation for people's issues, even when people can't represent those issues on their own. Even when it comes to owning party politics, like I said, Bernie Sanders, one of the hardest things for me selling him to other people in the primary was he's not a real Democrat. He's a socialist. He's too radical for me. If you present ideas in a way that doesn't seem radical, those ideas are more likely to take place and more likely to seem commonplace. If anybody wants to argue with me, or if you know any content creators who would disagree with me, I'd be glad to have a conversation about that.
Is that I think condemning people and getting them to do things is a good thing. Damn it, dude. I really can't. Like, this freaking game today is... I can't do anything. And every team that I'm on sucks. They all just suck